little bit about the way that I see, so that hopefully I can shift your perception and maybe see these things the way that I see them. And I don't tell stories in a very linear way, so if you get lost, just put a finger up and I'll be like, okay, I need to slow down or circle back. So I was born on Long Island, which is in New York State, and my mother is black and Italian. Her father was an immigrant who came in, I want to say 1903, as a 13-year-old, and then he turned around and went and fought in World War I here in Europe, and that was pretty unusual. It was also against the law to marry a black person. And my mother's people, she was descended from slaves from South Carolina. So I only know through DNA the areas of Africa that we come from, but I don't culturally know anything about my Africanness. So it was very hard for me to relate to the African and Italian side because my mother's father died when she was 10. So I never met him. And my father's side has been on Long Island for thousands of years. We are the real native New Yorkers, and the tribe is Shinnecock, and we have relatives that are Montaukett and Puspatuck and Patchogue, and if you go to Long Island, you'll hear all these place names that still exist. And Shinnecock, we're the only tribe that has a reservation on Long Island still. And it's about 800 acres, and it's right in the middle of the Hamptons, where all the very, very wealthy people have mansions. So it's this real paradox. And I didn't grow up on the reservation. My family, my last name's Seaman. I was given this name because my ancestors worked on ships, on whaling ships. It turns out Long Island had a huge history of whaling. And so my family had been in Huntington, which was the whaling sort of headquarters of northern Long Island since the 1700s. So I can follow my father's line back to 1620 when the first Dutch arrived. And so I was raised very much culturally by my father's family. And we are matriarchal, matrilineal. That means the women hold the power, which is like, you're probably like, whoa. But what it meant in my family was the men all did everything in support of the women. And it was this beautiful kind of balance. They didn't stop being men. They still fished and hunted and fixed things around the house and worked regular jobs. But they always, maybe you feel this in some of your households where the women really have the last word. So if, for example, I wanted ice cream and I asked my grandfather, he'd say, yes, of course you can have ice cream, but you have to go ask your Nana. And if Nana said no, she had the final word. And so as a child, as a girl child, it was a little confusing growing up in a family that promoted my strength as a woman, wanted us to be leaders, never asked for us to be something that we weren't, and then go to school in a system that was really the reverse, that was like asking you not to put your hand up if you wanted to play baseball with the boys. And so I defied a lot of this. And I was the 13th girl in the United States to play Babe Ruth baseball on all-boy team. I didn't want to play softball. That was for girls. I wanted to play baseball and show them that I could do it. And this was normal. It was supported in my family. They drew the line, though, when it was contact football. Not European football, but American football. And they thought that was too dangerous. Because even in baseball, people would purposely throw the ball to hit me and try and make me cry and do things like that. So I say this to say that as a young girl, I was already being told it's okay to step outside and be authentic, whatever that is for me. And my grandfather took great pains to educate us. He was the one that took us into the woods as little children, and he would stop at each tree and have me put my hand on the tree, and he'd introduce and say, this is your relative, in the same way that I am your relative, and you must respect it. And of course, as children do, one day I was just pulling leaves off of a branch, and my grandfather saw me, and in a very gentle way, he said, you think you can do what you want to that tree without consequence? That you're somehow separate from it? He said, if you think that you're separate from nature, see how long you can hold your breath. And he made me sit there and hold my breath. And he said, understand that these relatives give you the air that you breathe. These relatives give you the wood that you build our houses with, and all of these great things, or the chair you sit in. You must respect it. Do everything with respect. And understand that they are your relatives. And in a little sense, we understood that everything was related to us. We would go fishing every day. We were poor monetarily, but incredibly rich as a family. And when we would go fishing, the fish that we caught, when he would clean the fish, he taught us at an early age how to clean the fish, gut the fish and scale the fish, and then he would walk with us over to this very large garden that my grandmother had. And he would take those bits and we would put them in the soil with our vegetables. And he'd say, this fish is feeding the plant that will feed us. And the fish will feed us in many ways, not just as we cook it, but as it comes through this plant. So always teaching us about our interconnectedness, our interrelatedness. And I don't know how that feels to hear, because I know you're raised in a very different way of seeing the world, where you're told that, God was given dominion over all the creatures. And we were raised very differently. We were raised to understand that it's all interconnected. And we have to be kind and gentle and respect. A lot of people don't understand how it is, no matter where I am, I can sit and an animal will come up to me. I don't have any special power. It's just that I recognize and acknowledge that this is my relative. And when you see these creatures as your relatives, it's like having anyone next to you. They feel safe, they don't feel threatened. And so this comes in handy. All of these things that I learned as a child, the way that I was raised, really helped to prepare me. One of the things that pertains to the storms, it was something my grandfather always had lessons. From the age of about 5 until he died when I was 13, every day after school, every day, whether it was raining, snow, cold, hot, didn't matter, every day I had to sit outside, and I was not allowed to move more than the area of my arms. And I had a favorite spot under a huge maple tree on a picnic bench. And I would sit out there for an hour. And after an hour, he would call me in and he'd say, "What did you see?" And if I was feeling belligerent, I said, "I didn't see anything, Grandpa." And he'd say, "Well, go back outside." And so pretty quickly, you're like, okay. So an hour for a child of 5 is an eternity. Sitting out there and watching the leaves or the clouds or insects or birds or a caterpillar making its way across the lawn. All of these things you start to notice. You start to become aware of the world. And I didn't realize how powerful that was as a photographer, to be given that, to be still, to learn to be still. And I encourage all of you in your daily life to embrace the practice. Maybe you can't do an hour, but even 5 minutes, you start to notice things that you're like, I never noticed that before. And one of the things that would happen is, I would say, when he'd say, "What did you see?" I would say, "Well, I saw these clouds and they were kind of rippled like this." And he'd say, we call those a mackerel sky. and that means it will rain within 24 hours. Or I saw a spider building a web, no rain today. I saw a butterfly, no rain this week. So he would help me to interpret these signs. And I took that for granted. I thought all the kids were being raised this way. I didn't realize how unusual that was. And one of the things he did pertaining to storms that really helped me when I started storm chasing is when I was 6 years old. It was, how many of you been to New York in the summer? In the summer, it can be incredibly hot and humid, and like you just took a shower and 5 minutes later you're like, I need another shower. It can be that kind of hot, oppressive heat. And one day he took us outside into the grass. It was going to be one of Grandpa's lessons, and there were a bunch of me and my cousins, and there was not a cloud in the sky, bright blue sky, but really hot summer day. And very quickly, we just started to perspire. And we're sitting there really starting to wilt, like, you're wiping your face because it's so hot. And just when we're just about had enough, he points to the sky, and this little white tuft of cloud starts to appear, and he said, do you see that cloud? That's your sweat that evaporates to become the cloud, that becomes the rain, that waters the plants, that feeds the animals, that feed us. Always teaching about this cycle. So when I was chasing storms, I thought, how much of this is our water? And when I'm photographing icebergs, I think how many ancestors, because again, remember, all my relations, we are made of the material of this planet. All of us. It's a closed thing, unless you jettison your remains out into space or you're going to migrate to Mars. You will return to the material of this planet. We are earthlings. And the story that set me on the course, how does somebody like me from Long Island end up in the Arctic and Antarctic and chasing tornadoes? How does that happen? When I come from a very poor family, when I was homeless, I left home at 15 because I just couldn't get along with my mother anymore. She was Roman Catholic, and the two ideologies were in collision. And I just couldn't stand to take that anymore, and so I had to leave. And I was lucky enough that I had friends in New York City that let me sleep on their couches while I continued to go to the Fame High School. Do you guys know this movie or TV show? I went to that high school, but for visual art. And yes, there was some dancing in the cafeteria, and yeah, but not so much like the movie. But a lot of people who went to that school I do see now on screen and films as musicians. So it was a very productive place. It taught us discipline. And while I was going to that school and I left home, they recognized that I was at risk of falling through the cracks or getting into trouble. I mean, it was New York City. If I, like the idea of my daughter in that situation, like today, I can't even fathom it. But here I was in 1984 in New York, and New York was much rougher then. And I did some things. I was a graffiti artist on subway trains until I was caught about to put a sticker on a subway train, and a police officer was like, I didn't put it on, so I hadn't committed a crime. But he said, I really hate paperwork. How about you promise me you'll never, ever do this again, and we'll just forget about it. And I said, I promise. And because that's a promise, I never did again. So that was the end of my graffiti career. And probably a good thing, because it helped to direct me into other ways of expressing my creativity. And so homeless, 15, went to school. The school recognized I was at risk, so they put me in this after-school program where they gave me a film camera. And I share this part of the story because maybe some of you know some youth that feel like they're a little bit lost. And I can only say encourage them to do something creative. It doesn't matter whether it is music, art, drama, writing, give them something creative to do with that anger and confusion that they had. Because that's what I was. I was angry and confused. And when they gave me that camera, it was a Nichromat film camera. And they took away the manual. They said, you have to figure out how to use it. And they taught me how to bulk load black and white film and how to develop it and how to use a darkroom, a wet darkroom. And so they set me off and they said, go photograph your experiences. In the 80s, with all my punk rock friends, I have all these pictures of us. And, giving me that camera was one of the smartest things that school could have done, because it gave me something positive and creative to do. And it gave me an excuse to be places I had no business being, but doing something creative. In that school, we were also, because it was in New York City, we were required as students to go to major museums and private collections. We had free access, total access to stuff that most people will never see. And we had to go every week as part of our school. And so I used to go to the Metropolitan Museum, and they're like, she's back. And they always assigned a guard with me, because I'd go up to the Monet's water lilies and I'd be like, they're too close. Or I'd go up to the Rodin marble sculptures, and how can you not want to touch them? But I would look at the Rubens paintings and the Rembrandts and some of the clouds that these people were able to paint. I was so envious, because I did not have the knowledge or discipline to do that. But I realized I could do it with a camera. Somehow with a camera, I felt I was able to understand the light. And so I was making all these pictures. I graduated, and I only went to university because one of my great uncles forced me, sat down with me at the kitchen table, and made me fill out university applications, and went with me to the post office to mail them. And he sat down with me, filled out financial aid forms, and he went with me to the post office to make sure they got. That's the only reason I went to university. And I'm so glad that he championed me that way. So I went to university. It was 4.5 years of art. And by the end of it, I was up to here with so what was the artist's intention? I think I come from more of a practical sense of art. I understand the importance of being academic and understanding movements and artists' intentions, but for me, I just wanted to make. And in my senior year, one of my professors was John Cohen, and I don't know how many of you are into music, but John Cohen is one of these Renaissance men. He was in a band called the New Lost City Ramblers. And if you're a Grateful Dead fan, they wrote a song about Uncle John's band. He is Uncle John. So he was an incredible musician. He was a filmmaker. He traveled to the Andes and was making these beautiful films about the people there. But he, for me, at school, was my drawing teacher. And we would go out into the beautiful fields and woods of the campus and sit and draw for hours. And he would tell me about all of his travels and the cultures he would meet. And he reminded me, he said, Camille, you have a culture. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I mean, I grew up doing beadwork. And I thought maybe I should investigate that. So I started to do my beadwork again, using porcupine quills dyed and traditional brain tan smoked deer hide. That was done the way we did it for thousands of years. And I started to embrace this, and I found this great joy, because not only was I making beautiful objects like moccasins and bags and dolls and all sorts of things, clothing, but it was not only beautiful, but it had function. And I liked that idea of form meeting function. And so when I graduated, I moved out to California. In California, I needed ocean. As a sea woman, I left one coast for the other. And when I got to California, it was the first place where people stopped asking, so what are you? New York, the East Coast, everywhere I went, what are you? they all wanted to know what my ethnic background was so that they could put me in a little box and go, oh yeah. So when people originally would ask me, what are you? First I say, I'm black, and they go, yeah, what else? I say, I'm Italian, they go, what else? And I go, I'm Native American, they go, oh yeah. Like they got what they wanted. And California was the first place I didn't get any of that. Suddenly it was live and let live. Not that it's a utopia, but in the States it's almost like a little island of respite right now. The parts that aren't burning. And so in California, I was doing my beadwork, and I discovered surfing. And so I was doing my beadwork to maintain my surfing habit. And I'm trying to figure out if I should tell you the story about how I learned to surf. My friend from Long Island, Oliver, he came to California and he was a surfer, and I had just been laid off from a job at an architect firm. And he said, well, why don't you come with me to the beach and just hang out? And I said, okay. So I'd go and I'd watch him surf, and after a few weeks I was like, that looks like fun. And he said, well, if you want, I'll teach you, have extra board, and let's see if we can get you in the water. And I was like, after a while, I was like, okay, I want to do it. So we went to this place called Bolinas, which is north of San Francisco, near Stinson Beach, if anybody's familiar. And he suited me up, gave me the board, and as we went to the water, he said, there's 3 rules. Don't turn your back on the ocean. If you get knocked off your board and you come up, always come up with your hand over your head. And he said, if you get caught in what we call the washing machine, he said, relax. And I was like, okay. And so we started to paddle out, and it was I felt very unstable. The water there is very cold and murky. You can't see anything. And I was freaking out. And I turned to him and I said, Oliver, I'm afraid. And you know what my friend did? He paddled away. And I was like, I was so outraged. And he did his surf session, and I struggled for a while, and after a while I gave up, and I went back to the beach, and I was like, he has to come out sometime. And when he came out, and I said, I told you I was afraid, how could you leave me? And he told me something that really just shifted everything in my life for me in that moment. He said, no one can teach you to manage your fears except you. And he was right. There's no way he could have just made my fear go away and suddenly I could surf. So every day after that for a year, I would go out and I'd freak myself out. I'd be like, knowing that just 29 miles away are the Farallon Islands, which is a great white breeding ground for sharks. And I know there's sea lions all everywhere, and I'm like, okay, they eat sea lions. And I see sea lions around me, but okay. And I would start to say, what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, you could drown. I'm not drowning. Okay. What's the second worst thing? You get bit by a shark. Is that happening? No, it's not happening. So every day working through this until finally it wasn't an issue. And so I was like, well, if I could do that with surfing, what else could I do that with? And so little by little, I started tackling all the things that I thought I was afraid of to realize that I'm not afraid. I'm more uncomfortable with the feeling of feeling fear than I am of pushing through towards it. I can't tell you how many people I meet who are afraid of dogs. And I had 2 of the most gentle dogs, the greatest possible dogs that you could overcome these fears with, and they wouldn't do it. No, I'm afraid of dogs. And I knew that feeling I couldn't live with. I would much rather lean in and touch the dog and get over that fear than live with this, no, I can't. And I learned from my grandfather that when someone says, I can't, what they're really, really saying is, I don't want to. There is no such thing as can't. At the end of the day, it's really, I don't want to. And so I learned to not be afraid and to do things that other people are like, are you crazy? Like, so with my surfing, I went down and lived on the beach in Mexico by myself for a few months, just surfing, living on the beach. And people are like, alone? Are you crazy? I traveled all over the world alone. I went to Fiji surfing alone, almost died because I got dengue fever. But it didn't stop me. And I should say, all of this time, I had my camera with me, but I didn't consider myself a photographer. And then the beadwork, I had gotten so popular. Galleries all over the country were asking for my work. I was working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, just to keep up with the orders, until one day I woke up and my hand felt like it was on fire. And I went to the doctor and they said, oh, you have depravane's tendinitis, and you have 3 options. You can rest it, you can do cortisone shots, or you can do surgery. And I said, well, let's start with the rest. And while I was resting it, my boyfriend at the time, who is my daughter's father, or became my daughter's father, he said, well, I have to go to LA on a business trip, why don't you come with me? And so it was just 1 hour flight from Oakland to Los Angeles. I said, sure. So we're in Oakland Airport, and they announced they've oversold the flight, and if anyone could wait just 1 hour, they would give a free round-trip ticket anywhere they flew. And I was like, an hour? I can do that. So I gave up my seat. And I, sidebar, have to say, if anybody said, if you do this, you are going to end up chasing tornadoes and at the ends of the earth and in extreme, I would never have believed it. But this moment was a door opening. And one of the things, another thing my grandfather said is, if a door opens, walk through it, even if it's not one that you planned, because it has great possibility and teaching for you, and it will probably lead you closer to what you want, and you think you even know that you want. And so here was a door, a free ticket. I took it. And a lot of people get these free tickets, but they don't ever use them. And so I decided to go to Kotzebue, Alaska, because it was Alaska Airlines. And before this moment, I had no ambition, desire, interest. I wasn't interested at all in the North Pole, cold, nothing. Part of the reason I was happy to leave New York was to escape the cold winters. And here was this free ticket. And I chose Kotzebue specifically because it was the supposed Bering Land Bridge, that which my native ancestors would have traveled across during the last ice age. And I was curious about what that must have felt like. And so I decided to go check it out for myself. And I did a little bit of research. I knew it would be cold. I went into the local North Face outlet and I bought some warm clothes and I put them in a bag. And then in the last week of March, when I knew there would still be sea ice and it would still be cold, but the sun was up, I went to Kotzebue. And when I landed, rookie mistake, I'll never do it again. I had checked my bag with all my warm clothes. And I was only wearing like a polar fleece, sweater and some slip-on shoes, and I was not prepared. There was no jetway. This was a tiny little airport, and they had the stairs from the plane. When they opened the door and I came to the stairs, my nostril hairs and lungs, like this choking cold because it was minus 30 Fahrenheit. And I was like, oh, I should go get my warm clothes. And I went into the airport, and you probably can see where this is going. Alaska Airlines, turns out, is notorious for losing bags. And so with all my warm clothes lost, and it was minus 30, I was like, oh no. But the Inupiat people that worked in the airport, they were lovely women. They said, sister, don't worry, we got you. And they completely outfitted me in sealskin, parka hat, gloves, everything I needed. And they said, when your stuff gets here, we'll get it to you. And side note, when my stuff did get there and I put it on, I froze. Like, their technology works. And so one day, with my film camera, I tucked it inside my parka, and I took those first steps out onto the sea ice. And it was such an amazing experience. Have any of you ever stepped on sea ice? 1, 2. I recommend it. Because for me, taking those steps off of the land onto the sea ice, with everything wrapped, because even though it was minus 30, it was closer to minus 50 with the wind chill. it was squeaky like styrofoam. And these first steps felt like so extraterrestrial for me. It was like my other planet. It felt like something out of Star Wars. And here I was on this frozen surface, and I just started walking. And every 10 feet or so, there was a twig in the ice. I was like, there's even a path. This is great. I can totally do this. And every 10 minutes or so, someone on a snowmobile would come up, because I was just walking away from the town, totally bundled up. And they'd stop and they go, are you okay? And I go, yeah, I'm just going for a walk. And they'd be like, okay. Side note, it turns out that Kotzebue has such, unfortunately, a high suicide rate that when people said they were going for a walk, that was their code for like, I've had enough and I'm going off myself. And they're like, okay, have a good walk. So there was even traffic. I thought, this is totally fine, I'm fine. And I walked for a couple hours this way. And I want you to know that being on the frozen sea ice, I had no actual idea that I would reach Russia. I just wanted to do a sort of reverse commute and get a feeling for what that must feel like to walk across such a thing. And so I just kept walking. And even after the twigs stopped and the traffic stopped, I walked and walked. And about an hour out with no traffic and no twigs, 2 snowmobiles pulled up. A Russian woman and an Inupiat man. And they asked me a different question. They said, where are you going? And I said, in my naivete, really, it just sounds stupid as I say it. I said, I'm trying to get to where the ice ends and the sea begins. And in my mind, I really thought it was like, a shelf. Like you could just walk to the end and there would be the sea. And they were like, that's 22 miles away. And I was like, oh, I can't walk that far. And I want to just emphasize, I had no water, no food, no shelter, just what I was wearing and my camera, film camera, in my parka. Because I don't know if you know this, but film will freeze and crack at about minus 35. So I had to keep it in. That's all I had. And nothing. And they were like, well, we're going that way. And I heard my grandfather saying, when a door opens. I was like, never been on a snowmobile before. And I was like, I said, well, I don't want to go all the way. They were going ice fishing and they wouldn't come back. I said, but maybe I'll go part of the way. And they were like, okay. So I climbed on the back with the guy and off we went. And I, having never been on one, had no idea these things go like 60 miles an hour. And we're zoom over the sea ice. I'm like, first I'm like, whoa, this is really cool, wow, the sea ice, we're going fast. And then after a few minutes, I started doing the math, like 60 miles an hour. It's like, whoa, stop, because I have to walk this back. And they're like, okay. And they pulled over. And I remember it was one of the few times I took the camera out and I took a picture of them with their snowmobiles as they left me. And I just stood and watched them until they just disappeared into the white. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. It just disappeared. And then I turned around to look for the town, and it was gone. Like, just all around me in every direction was white, and I was like, what have I done? I was like, what have I done? There are polar bears out there. I'm on the sea ice. I could just crack open and, there's nobody to save me. I could freeze to death. If there was a whiteout, I had nothing except what I had. And so taking a note from my surfing book was relax, stay calm, turn around and start following those tracks back before the wind blows them away. And so as I walked back across that ice, it took me over 5 hours before I saw the town. But as I walked, all of my grandfather's teachings were just flooding in, and I understood it in a very physical way that I was standing on my rock in space. And that's what I mean, that we are all made of the material of the planet. I felt that this was my rock in space. And it really was the first time I could feel such an emotional connection to being an earthling. And I understood that in that moment, the fact that I was there meant nothing. The snow would blow over my coat. I meant nothing in the scale of time and space. we'd disappear. But the fact that I could stand there and have these thoughts, I knew was a miracle. And so I went back to California, and as I told this story to my mother-in-law, she is also a fascinating woman. She said she was fascinated by this idea that I had met my planet, and she wanted to go check it out herself. And so she was like, "Camille, you're so interesting." And I didn't know it until I got back, but I was about 3 weeks pregnant with my daughter as I did that walk on the frozen ice. So my awakening as an earthling was also in tangent with my awakening as a mother. And I thought that was fascinating. I was very apathetic. I had this idea, if I just keep my head down, do what I like in my life, that's enough. Do no harm. And I didn't think I needed to do anything important or try and make any statement or become a photographer. I never felt that. And she decided, my mother-in-law, that she had to go check this out for herself. And at the age of 70, she signed on to a Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker and went to the geographic North Pole. And when she came back, she said she too had this understanding that she was standing on her rock in space, and she wanted to write a book about it. And now a year or so has passed, and she says, "You have to come with me to this place called Svalbard. I'm going to take the whole family there." By then, my daughter was born. "And I'm going to interview you there about, what's happening on our planet and what the North Pole means." And I was like, "I don't ever need to go be that cold again." And she's like, she's a very strong woman. She's like, "Oh yes, you're coming." But in the interim, 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, I remember sitting on my couch in Berkeley and watching the second plane hit live. And I, as one of the jobs that I did as a young homeless kid in New York, worked as a New York City bike messenger, delivering parcels and mail to those towers every day. So I knew them in a very three-dimensional way. I knew those buildings. And when they fell, I should also say that on my refrigerator, no matter where I lived, I had a photograph that I took as a 15-year-old of the Brooklyn Bridge with the World Trade Center behind. And it was always sort of, "You're from New York," just a little homage of that's where I'm from. And when they fell, like this little trigger happened in my brain that I understood that my daughter would never know those buildings the way that I did. She would never go up in them. She would never know them except for in a photograph or a film. And it started to dawn on me the power and importance of a photograph as a historic document, as proof of someone or something existing. And I thought about that. And then finally we were bombing Afghanistan. I remember like it was on the news, this green night vision goggle of precision bombing, and I was like sitting on the couch again with my almost 9-month-old thinking, "We're going the wrong way. This is so dark. This is so cynical." And I remember thinking as I watched it, what can I do to show that there's something beautiful about this life, about this planet? And I almost pathetically was like, well, I can make pretty pictures. And it was like a light switch just flicked on, and I knew in that moment that I would use my camera to document my life. Even though I had been to Alaska, it wasn't like suddenly I was like, "Oh, I'm going to spend the next 10 years documenting climate." And it wasn't like that. It was this one little, my life, my experience. And I think it's true. When you present the universe with your intention, suddenly like all these things that seem like were obstacles just seem to fall away. And it was very strange because then here was my mother-in-law saying, "Well, we're going to Svalbard." And I was like, "Well, I'm a photographer now. I'm going to photograph it. I'm going to photograph this experience." And so I went ridiculously with 5 different formats of camera And I had my 4x5 with cloth overhead, and my Rolleiflex. I had a special panoramic camera. I had 35mm. And I just photographed the hell out of that. And my daughter, by that time, was 3 years old, the first time she went up above the Arctic Circle and saw her first polar bears. And there, as we left Longyearbyen and Svalbard, in open sea, and then turned right and headed north into the drift ice. I had no idea that there's drift ice for like 60 to 100 miles. It's just rough ice. I realized how mistaken my idea was in Alaska, that I could just walk up to the edge and be like, there's the sea. I mean, there is so much drift ice. And then finally, with our little icebreaker, we hit solid pack ice. And when we hit that solid pack ice, it was amazing. Just so we backed up about a quarter mile and got up some speed. And I don't know if you know this, but the way that icebreakers work is not by point cut, but by pushing their weight up on top of the ice, and the weight breaks the ice. And so we hit again, nothing. We backed up again, hit it again, and finally the bow of the ship went up enough, and it, just like a cartoon, it's this beautiful crack, and then this huge, like 6 foot thick piece of ice, and I'm just on the bow going, it feels so wrong, but it feels so right. Like, I was thinking Titanic, ice bath ship, but here we were going through it, and I was like, this is amazing. And my daughter, I have a video of her going, there's so much noise, it's scary, Mom. She didn't like the noise, but she loved being up there. And so, she's, oh, and so there on the spot, we were like, well, like, this is what the Arctic is like. What's the Antarctic like? And so as a thank you, because my mother-in-law paid for that trip, we were like, we'll take her to Antarctica. So we took that same little icebreaker to Antarctica the next year. So my daughter turned 5 in Antarctica. Really feel sorry for her. She has a rough life. No adventures at all. But anyway, when I got to Antarctica, because the switch had come on, in between Svalbard and Antarctica, I was like, well, I need skills. I need to get some more photo skills, but there's no way I'm going back to school for this. And so I decided to call up any photographer whose work I was in awe of and just talk to them. So the first one I called was Steve McCurry, and from National Geographic. And you might know him as the Afghan girl with the green eyes. And he said, well, if you want to know, you have to come with me to Tibet. And I was like, okay. So in September, I went to Tibet with him, with my 5 different formats of camera. I mean, I was lugging this stuff through Tibet at altitude, and he was like, what the hell are you doing with all this crap? He challenged me. He said, 1 lens, 1 body, 1 year. And I was like, okay. I did it afterwards, and it was powerful learning. If anyone hears it, how many of you are photographers? How many of you have ever done 1 lens, 1 body, 1 year? It will change everything. But anyway, he would also yell at me because I would make pictures out in the daylight. And he was like, what the hell are you doing? Do you see this crappy light? And he'd pull me into some alley, and he'd take some poor Tibetan woman, and he'd be like, do you see how the light is softer in here? And the poor Tibetan woman's like, what? And we're photographing, and I'm like, oh. He reminded me of the importance of knowing what good light quality is and being sensitive. He said it, and I think it's true. He said it doesn't matter how good your subject is, your composition. If you do not understand quality of light, your images will not withstand the test of time. And I'm not interested in making selfie snapshots or Instagram things that are, up for a day. I'm hoping that these images will last hundreds of years. Fingers crossed. And so he reminded me about quality of light. And that was really important. And so I got really into photographing these beautiful Tibetan women, well, Tibetan people in general. The men are really great too. And then it was our trip to Antarctica. And so in my head, I was like, I'm going to be a journalist, photographing all the people. We got to Antarctica, and there were no people, and I was like, oh no, what do I do? And it was images like this that happened because I decided to embrace my grandfather's teaching of seeing all my relations and understanding that these are my relatives. So I'm making portraits of them as if they are my relatives. So, so it's not just a piece of ice. It's not just a penguin. It's a relative. And so in those moments, I'm trying to capture anything I would in a person, that moment that says something about themselves in this world, in this moment. And hopefully that emotes more than just the technical information of ice in Antarctica. Mm. And then marry that with my, hopefully, sensitivity to what good light is, then you can make magic if you're aware. And I just feel, I feel so lucky because when I'm out there, I'm like, this is happening and I am here. I am here to photograph it. And so as a photographer, I won't go into how it all just tumbled along, except to say that people started to notice my passion and my curiosity. I was doing this all for myself. I wasn't like pitching to magazines or anybody. And National Geographic, somebody gave the editor a portfolio of my work, like, did you see what this woman's doing? She's doing this on her own. And so they gave me a National Geographic award, which was some money, but more importantly, it was their stamp of approval, which got me on a rush. Then I got invited on a Russian expedition in the far side of Antarctica, the Ross Sea. And that was with a proper icebreaker with helicopters and everything, and drunk on vodka Russians. It was really an experience. It wasn't until I was in the cockpit in one of the helicopters. These were old Russian helicopters from the 70s, so very old, that I noticed the guy was flying by wire. None of the gauges worked. And I was like, we're in Antarctica over icebergs, and it was crazy. But while I was on that ship, the expedition photographer on that ship, every day was like, how did you do that? And I love to teach. I love to share. And so I'd say, this is how I do it. And by the end of the trip, he was like, you should really have this job. So he gave me the card for the company, and I got hired as the expedition photographer. And first on Russian ships, then on Canadian ships, then on ships from Monaco and Norway, and now still I'm going in 2 weeks back to work on a Norwegian company. And so I became bipolar. I started going from the Arctic to the Antarctic every year, like a little Arctic turn, just back and forth. And I was getting paid to do it. But more importantly, it was giving me time and access to these places. When the UN announced that climate change was happening, that it was real in 2007, suddenly my phone started ringing. And one of those calls was from the National Academy of Sciences Museum in Washington, D.C. And they called me and they said, we'd like to come to your studio. And I was like, thank goodness I have a studio. I was like, okay. So they flew out and looked at the work, and like right there on the spot, they said, we'd like to give you a solo show in the museum. And I was like, but I never shown in a cafe, gallery, nothing. And here was my first ever show in a major museum in Washington, D.C. And I remember signing the very first print I sold to a museum in Michigan. And I was shaking as I signed it because I just couldn't believe that somebody wanted this. It was something that I loved. I couldn't believe other people were valuing it. And so all of this stuff started happening very quickly. It was like, because 2006 was the first year that I was working enough to say I was a professional photographer. And then all these magazines, when they interview you, they're like, so what are you working on now? And I'd be like, I don't know, I just do it. I don't say I'm going to. It's where the universe leads me. Like, I just look for the open door. And I started to feel a little bit of pressure, like, what if that's all I have is, this one body of work and that's it? And one day I was vacuuming, because I do vacuum, the living room while my daughter, at the time, was 8 years old. This was 2008. And she was watching TV, Nat Geo Storm Chasers. And I saw this amazing light, but they weren't shooting it wide enough. And I was like, she saw me doing like this, like looking sideways in the TV, like hoping to see what was over there. And as an 8-year-old, she is amazing. She was at that age. She still is. She said, "Mom, you should do that." I said, "Yeah, I should." And her dad said, "Well, why don't you go Google it?" So during a commercial, I went and Googled storm chasing. And this whole world appeared. I don't know if you've ever Googled storm chasing, but it's this whole world where you can pay professional meteorologists to take you out into dangerous weather for a week as a tour. And I was like, okay. And one site really stood out. It was uber nerdy. It had like lightning flashes across the screen and thunder noises. And I recognize passion when I see it. And this is the guy. I want to go with this guy. And in 2008, all of his trips were booked solid for the summer. And I was like, oh. So I sent him an email and I said, I'm really interested in doing this. If anyone cancels, please let me know. I'd love to do it. Less than an hour later, he emailed back saying, "Can you be here in 3 days? I just had a space come open." So 3 days after my daughter said, "Mom, you should do that," I was doing it. And I wasn't prepared for what it is. Storm chasing is this incredibly visceral, it is all of your senses. You have this warm wind blowing at your back. You have that smell, that electric smell right before it rains, and the colors, the light. It was just incredible. And after a week of doing that, I said to the guy, if anybody cancels, I want to come back. Just call me. He said, "Well, can you drive?" And it just so happened I had a commercial license for 15 passengers. He said, "You're hired." So after 1 week of storm chasing, suddenly I was getting paid to do it. And so I did that for 6 years, chasing storms. And it wasn't so much the tornadoes that interested me, but the supercells themselves. Like that what happens with these structures and the light. And so you'll see a lot of my storm images aren't necessarily about the tornado, but it's about this incredible light that happens in the Great Plains of the U.S. when these storms happen. And then, just to round it off, around 2011, I was up in Svalbard, and I was starting to have lots of dreams about polar bears. And it was always the same dream, with these shipping containers and polar bears everywhere, and I had to get around the shipping containers without the polar bears getting me. And I realized I was getting more and more anxiety about contact with polar bears. And that year, a young British boy, 17-year-old, was killed. And that kind of did it for me. Like something just, I don't ever want to be the reason that a polar bear is shot. And so I was like, yeah. I also didn't like the fact that we were able to get with our marine diesel ship within 200 miles of the North Pole with no ice and at all, just open sea. And we could have gone further if we had enough fuel. And I was like, I need to rethink, like, how am I being part of this? Am I part of the problem? I just needed to reevaluate everything. So in 2011, I took a huge break, and I became a TED Fellow. Do you guys know what TED Talks are? Anybody not know? Okay. So as a TED Fellow, it was a great opportunity because they gave me a global stage to literally talk to Al Gore and Bill Gates and all of these people in the audience and tell them why this place or like these things are important. And that just, it took me a year to recover from all the stuff that happened from just one TED Talk. And even that wasn't enough. Like, I felt like not enough is happening climate awareness-wise fast enough. And I've sat in rooms with billionaires who want to do something but don't know what to do as they flew to the meeting in their G4 jets. I've been on councils for the uncertain future of humans, where we literally spend months and months talking about what's coming and what do we do. How do we... People aren't taking this serious enough. And I started to really get despondent. And I remember I really, after Svalbard, I was so depressed. I laid in bed for a good few days, and I just came to the conclusion of, well, my daughter and I will just have a good life, and when it ends, it ends. So I told her, as an 11-year-old, I said, just promise me you won't have any kids. And she said, Mom, I'm 11. How can I promise you I won't have any kids? And she said, besides, you have to try. And that really, that hit me. And I realized, I do, we all do. Have to try. And so, knowing that I can't force people to look at an image and go, oh, that's worth saving, we need to do something. I can't blame people for not feeling that. So I became a Stanford Knight Fellow. And this was like an amazing opportunity. Basically, I got paid to have a year at Stanford taking any classes I wanted. And so I took classes that I felt I was insecure in, like executive communication, because I didn't feel comfortable talking to Elon Musk or these people. I wanted to be able to talk to them and not feel like, oh, no. I wanted to say it with confidence. So I took an executive communication class. I took a video editing class. I took a drama class because I needed to know how to feel more comfortable in front of people, and it was great. I took Tai Chi too. That was good. That was really good. And there I wrote my first book, which there's only 10 copies here.
But we will get more, but we have 10 that you can have tonight.
Yeah, so I took a non-fiction writing class, which I always felt a little insecure about my writing, but something happened and I was able to put it into that book, and so there's that, and then from there more things have started to happen. I understand, and I always did from the beginning, from the very beginning. I understood that when you make a photo of anyone or anything, you take on the responsibility of making sure you honor them appropriately and bringing the attention. We should not, as photographers, make images that end up under our bed. That is not the purpose. And so I understand that it is my job to honor these incredible moments that I've been so lucky to experience and witness and record, to make sure you get to see it. And I'm thankful to Joanna and Andrew for having me in the space, because I haven't showed in Europe since 2009. So thank you. And I'm sure you have questions about individual photographs. If you do, I'm happy, just point to one and I can tell you what's going on. So what did make you guys come out here tonight? No pressure.
Yeah, I saw your work. I don't remember when it was. I don't actually remember where it was as well, but it just really struck me right away the way, like you say, that there are portraits, and that really spoke to me. I was amazed it was finally here in Stockbridge, because I'm sure. I don't remember where it was, but I think it was the blog somewhere a few weeks ago.
That was the other thing. A lot of photographers get very tight or stingy about their work online. And from the beginning, I never did. I knew because I had taken the time to understand how I see differently. And I knew that the way would always find itself back to me. And it did. I never felt the need to put copyright claims in. It's embedded in the metadata. And people have tried to pass my work off as their own. And it's amazing that the global community outs them to me. They say, hey, who are you trying to pass that? That's a Camille. So, yeah, it's amazing how much is on Pinterest, and sometimes I look and I had no idea so much of my imagery is online somewhere or being talked about, and people. So I don't feel the need to hold it. And you, what about you?
Well, I live locally and I saw the exhibition recently and was just intrigued by it, so very interested to...
Had you been interested in polar regions or storms before?
An interest, but not a huge interest. It's not something that it's something I am interested in, but not, yeah.
What's special about...
I'm very interested in the environment issues.
Yeah,
very
exactly.
Interested, yeah.
When I first started going, it was curiosity. I was like,
Yeah.
and I remember my very first massive tabular iceberg. I mean, this thing was the size of several city blocks, and it our ship was tiny, and we had a crazy Norwegian captain who was brave enough to go much closer than he should have, just so that we could see like the waterfalls coming off and stuff. And I remember like shaking just because my brain was short-circuiting, trying to imagine how many snowflakes on top of snowflake, year after year, how many. That's a lot. That was just so much. And of course now this iceberg, all the ice that you see here it only exists in these images. And it's weird that I started out as like wanting to show people how great our planet is, and it's turning more and more into this is what we're losing.
Yeah.
And I would hate that in 100 years from now that our children's children say this is what we lost.
Mm-hmm.
I can't abide that. It just, yeah.
Not when we can stop it happening. That's the
Exactly.
when we've got the power to do something.
If we want to actually call ourselves intelligent. And since I picked on you,
there was something that touched me about the photos, and I wanted to figure out what that was.
did you figure it out?
Not yet. It sounds terrible.
No,
I
it's
did
okay.
a degree in art history, so I always go back to things and I try to figure out what it is, because I spent 4 years doing that. So I think I'll figure out eventually. Yeah.
I hope that some of what you heard will help give you hints. But never, ever, ever. I don't care for, as a native person, I don't care for missionaries, and never wanted to say, look at this and you should feel. I always wanted to just put it there and let you have a conversation with it. Let you create your own relationship. Let you have your own dialogue. And I hope that, these images are up for just a few more days, and if you have time to come and sit with someone very wise said you should give any piece of art at least 3 minutes of your time, undivided time, and a lot will happen for you. There's a lot of work that really I really don't like, and I love that it makes me feel that way, because that it made me feel that I really don't like that. That's as powerful as something making me go, oh, that's really wow. Mm-hmm. They're both. Anybody can make you feel something with a visual representation is pretty powerful. So just let yourself sit with it for 3 minutes and see what happens. Anybody else want to share so I don't put everybody on the spot?
Yeah, I'll share. I really enjoyed your talk.
Was my accent very strong?
No. I live in the neighborhood. I was struck by this image. Oh, no, it's not this one. This one right here.
Yes.
When I came in and had a look, but then I was drawn to the storm images, and it reminded me of when I was a child in South Dakota. We were.
It's my favorite place to check.
Yes. So I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and we were basically trying to outrace a tornado. Yeah. But my dad had to pull over and take photos of the clouds.
Good
I was like, wow, I just had that sort of flashback as a child and seeing those skies like that. And so I was just intrigued to sort of hear the story behind the images.
So you want this one or that one?
Not just the bigger picture, and
okay.
What I like and relate to a bit, and being a keen photographer myself, and I have a question that goes with it is, you talk about doors opening for you, and it's quite remarkable, like the people you've been able to work with, the places you've been able to go. How many times have you actually had to push a door open, though?
Never. I've never approached a magazine and said, will you publish my images? I've never approached an editor and said, will you publish this? They've always found me. And I think the key was I was doing what I loved regardless. And I knew eventually that something would happen, but I was just going to keep doing the work. Steve McCurry says the same thing. A lot of photographers spend a lot of time talking about photography, but they don't make photographs. If you want to be a photographer, you have to make the photographs. It's the same with writing. It's the same with anything. You have to do the work. And I think because I just was enjoying myself doing the work so much, when stuff would happen, I'd catch it out of the side of my eye and be like, oh, yeah, okay. And I'd just keep doing it, oh, okay. So it was never, I was never aiming for a specific target. And that's actually,
you bring up a good, though, in a way that those doors must have been opening.
But you bring up a really good thing that I don't know if a lot of people live this way. I don't make plans.
Yeah.
Like my goal last night was to get to Edinburgh. That was my goal. I didn't have a plan of my original plan. Whenever you make a plan, the universe is like, ha ha ha. Okay, let's see what we can do with your human plan. So the goal is what the goal is, to get here at Edinburgh. And okay, obstacle, flight canceled. Are you still sticking to the goal, or are you going to deviate? Yes or no? It becomes simple yes and no questions. Yes, I'm still committed to the goal. Okay, what can you do? And when life is goal-oriented and yes and no like that, everything is either leading you towards your goal or away from it, in simple yes or no's. And I think a lot of photographers, you're a photographer, a lot of photographers don't take the time to think about where their work, where they want to see their work. To give you an example, my first ever exhibition at the National Academy of Sciences Museum, all my friends for months before that were like, oh, you should ask the cafe over there if they'll show your work. I was like, no, I don't see it there. And it's very weird. I had a vision of my work in a place with marble floors. And I was like, no, I just don't see it there. And they're like, well, you got to work your way up through the gallery system. And I was like, well, I don't have time for that. Make it work. I was like, it will happen or it won't. And then when I got that call, I was like, but what was really crazy is when I went to the opening in the museum in Washington, D.C., guess what? White marble floors. So I got approached by a magazine. They wanted to put this picture on the cover. And I was like, cool, a cover of a magazine? Great. We negotiated fees. It was all up and up. And then in the end, she said, it's a prepper magazine. Do you know what preppers are? They're these people getting ready for the Armageddon. And it was on the sidelines, on the side of my picture, it was Shotguns 101, or this is best handgun in the apocalypse. And I was like, no. Because that is not in alignment with my values. And you only get one soul. No cover, no money is worth. I cannot get that back, and so I said, I'm sorry. I cannot allow you to use that image. And they're like, no problem. I understand. But I tell people, like, a lot of photographers are just so they feel so desperate and hungry for like anything that they forget what they really want. And I do. I have a vision of my work going spiraling down the Guggenheim, and I have all white hair. And I hope that I make it to that day, but I know one day my work will hang spiraling down the Guggenheim in New York. I know it. I feel it. So that's my goal. It's just yes and no to get me there. And are you doing the work? Is that helpful?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned one body, one lens. Are you saying a lens appropriate for the shots you're taking on the day? Or is it one lens forever?
So one body, one lens, 1 year. So my choice that year was a Leica rangefinder with a 35 millimeter Summilux 1.4 lens. And another thing that Steve McCurry taught, and I totally believe in, is crop with your feet. None of this like spy shooting with a big zoom lens, unless it's a polar bear. You do not want to try to get up in a polar bear's face with a 35 millimeter. But like if I need to zoom with my feet, zoom out with my feet. And when you do this with one lens and one body, like a fixed lens, not even a zoom lens, you know before you pick up that after several months, you know that body and that lens so well that you know, you don't even have to look through the viewfinder, you know what is in it. And it's an incredible, it's like having a superpower. And you wonder why these photojournalists get these, they look like they're doing nothing, but their images are like, how did they get that? And it's because they know their equipment. A lot of people get so hung up on the newest, latest, greatest. But I have friends that use broken toy cameras in war zones, and they make incredible imagery because they know what they're working with.
That was a fantastic talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm interested a little bit more in how you go about your craft. And I'm thinking it's probably a very different situation between the ice and the storms. The storms maybe happen much quicker.
Yeah.
They kind of sit around a little bit more. But if you're going to go do a shoot, like how do you many pictures? Is it very planned? How does it happen?
Good question. Thank you. Anybody else like that question? A lot of times, for example, when I'm on the ship, the big ship, I can't control where we're gonna. I can't be like, Captain, 6 degrees. They don't care about me. I'm nothing. I don't mean anything. My goal is not their goal. And so then I am outside all the time, on the bow of the ship, or I'm always looking to see where the light is coming, where the sun is, what the clouds are doing, what the icebergs over there look like. And I literally patrol the decks of the ship, dressed incredibly warm so that I can be out there as long as possible. And I have something called a scoop, which is Swedish, and it's like a female skirt sleeping bag where you can pull it on over your clothes, and it's so toasty. And one of the things I learned very quickly was what my weak spots are. And when you can keep your weak spots warm, everything else feels warmer. So for me, it's my ears and my neck. If I keep those warmer, my hands feel warmer. If my feet are warm, everything is body-wise no problem. So those little things make it possible. But when I'm in, like for example, we have these small Zodiacs. Do you guys know what a Zodiac is? It's a black inflatable boat with an outboard motor on the back. It was invented by Jacques Cousteau. And so we have these partly because they are so rugged and durable. And so in the case of this image, for example, I just happened to look over and I was like, one frame, that's all I got because we're moving. And I couldn't say, stop, back up, because we were going somewhere and their goal is not my goal. So I saw it and I was, you know that saying, chance favors the prepared? So it means you're risking your camera because it's exposed, salt could spray up on it. And I have lost camera to the ocean in Antarctica. That was hard, but the card was still fine with the images. But this one, I had total control. One of the guys was like, hey, you want to go out there? And I was like, yes. So I had my own private driver, and I was like, a little bit this way, a little bit that way. A snow squall was coming. This was on Christmas Day, and I was already feeling guilty because it was another Christmas I wasn't home with my child. And it always was honor my family sacrifice by doing the best work that I can. not mope around and make excuses. Do the work. And so with this one, I saw the shape and the structure. I knew I needed it to feel stable and unstable at the same time. This one was from a zodiac as well, but it was. I think that's the only frame I have of that one. Because I wasn't crazy about how dirty. You can see how dirty the ice is behind. A lot of people don't know glaciers can be incredibly dirty. They basically grind the mountain, and all this dirt starts to turn up on top of it. The seabirds one was from the ship, and with a zoom lens. And then like the boats, that's just me walking along, and I'm I have this. Tai Chi comes in handy because I don't use a tripod on any of these. On a ship, it's kind of ridiculous because you're doing this anyway. So soft knees, Tai Chi stance, right? And so then, as you need to, Cartier-Bresson said the difference between a good photograph and a great photograph is millimeters. Millimeters. And by just moving your body, your weight up, down, by having those soft knees, you can make shapes do things. One of my university teachers back was Jan Groover, and if you don't know her work, you should look it up. Unfortunately, she's gone now. But I sat in this class and I didn't understand a word they were talking about. And like 10 years later, suddenly it just everything. I was like, oh, that's what she meant. And it's amazing how if you look at her pictures, especially the stuff she does in her kitchen sink, she is doing weird things with space where it's flipping up and back, and you're like, how are you doing that? And when you are photographing, when I'm photographing, the moment I raise the camera to my eye, I'm no longer thinking three-dimensionally. I'm thinking that I'm working on a two-dimensional flat plane, and my job is to use shape, light, composition to give the illusion of three dimension. And so I'm using my body in a very subtle way sometimes just to make the shapes do things, recede or pull forward. So that's that. With storm chasing is a whole other sack of potatoes, because when the guy, and they make it very clear, I will only say get in the car once, because he says he will not die while you're waiting to make a picture. And so I would not test that. And so storm chasing thing I learned really quickly is it's windy. You have this wind, warm, moist wind buffeting against your back, and when the storm collapses, it's this blasting cold air on your face. And so you have this wind, and again, that Tai Chi stance where you dig down in your body. And then when I'm photographing with this, it's amazing how dark it actually is. So it's a little forgiving because clouds are soft. But I learned pretty quickly these are the only film images I made with this special panoramic camera, because the lens just wasn't fast enough. I think it was 5.6. And even with 400 speed film, it was struggling to stay sharp. And so I do, actually with all of my photography, I practice. How many of you hunt? Good. Trick question. No, sharpshooters use this technique of inhale while I'm focusing, and then exhale as I depress the shutter, and that helps stabilize a lot when you don't have a tripod, when your elbows are in. And it actually you'll notice a huge difference. And the other thing is I don't drink coffee, so I have incredibly stable hands. But just learning to still, and sometimes you're so excited and you're like, your heart's beating and you don't want to miss the moment, and it's really important to just tranquil, just be still, and don't rush. So no, I don't go and then be like, oh, okay, that's good. Most of my images that I really like are single frame. That's all I have. Good question? Like, anybody else?
Do you use exposure compensation for the flow?
I use exposure compensation for everything. Do you guys know what exposure compensation is? So, especially with digital photography, how many of you were old school film photographers and struggle with digital? Or you feel you got digital? Okay. If you don't feel you really understand digital, it's about your histogram and exposure compensation. And without getting too technical and teaching the whole class right here, you can look this up online, but you want your histogram just because of the way that digital records data. A lot of people don't know this, but from your highlights to your middle grays, it's collecting twice as much information as your middle grays to your darks. So you want to emphasize capturing that light information. The back stuff you can fill in. So how many of you turn off your histogram instead of look at it? That when I look at the back of my camera, I'm not looking at the picture, I'm looking at my histogram. And I want my histogram to lean as far to the right without climbing the wall as possible in any situation, dark or light. And you might say, well, that sounds crazy. And exposure compensation is critical for that because sometimes you need just a slight third or seventh, lighter, darker. And so by using this exposure compensation, you can nudge it just a little bit closer to the wall without it climbing. Once it starts climbing, you're throwing away information and you don't want that. So for the reason I'm able to get the actual subtle details in the ice is because I'm taking the time to record it in that part of the histogram. If I was doing it like slides, I wouldn't have that subtle detail of the ice. I wouldn't have the skin. And so that is a technical way of photographing with digital that a lot of people, they get lost. And I would say go home and Google reading your histogram and how to use exposure compensation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I was interested, just to hear you talk, also just talked about a very technical aspect of digital photography, but I'm listening to, the difference between what you just talked about is how to take a picture, not make a picture.
Exactly.
What you spoke about earlier was how to make a picture. When you speak to, I've seen him, I've not seen him in person, Steve McCurry, but I've watched the videos on YouTube and stuff like that, and when you hear him talking, you may or may not have heard of him, Colin Pryor as well, with his landscape photography. When you get tutored by Colin, there's very, very little talk of the technical aspect. Mm-hmm. It's a bit like yourself, it was all, the process in terms of, what did you see, what did you want to capture, what story did you want to tell, and just, coming back to what drew me in, was that picture, I think that one was in the window a couple of weeks ago, no, this one here. This one here.
This one?
Yeah, and what drew me in originally is from the technical aspect, capturing all the details.
Yes.
Apart from the fact that it's a stunning picture, but hearing you tonight, it's it's about coming back and actually merging the story with the image now and taking a different viewpoint on the picture.
I mean this, it's never about the camera. The camera is a tool. If you are a carpenter, you have a different hammer for a different job, different wrench for a different, and the camera is the same. I have cameras that I use in the field in Antarctica because I know they have better weather seals, and that's about it. I could make the same image with my phone. I can. And so I don't want people to think, oh, if I had that lens, then I could do this. And that's why the little things of mastering one lens, one body, 1 year, like that alone, technically, you will understand your device in a way that it feels part of you.
I did one camera, one body, one holiday.
And then I think the whole time you were like, I wish I had.
Didn't change the lens on holiday, that was.
Yeah. And so it's those little disciplines. Like when I taught myself how to use 4x5 camera, with the loading the film and the car, I read, because again, I learned by doing. I read the best way to learn 4x5 camera is with Polaroid film, and they said take the camera and it should be totally off the tripod, in the case, totally. And then they said, time yourself, assemble it, load the film, focus, take the picture, deassemble, and do it over. Keep doing it over, so that you had this muscle memory of how the camera works and where everything is. And I kept doing that day after day until you didn't say, oh shoot, I forgot. Da, da, da. It was in, and that's the thing about the one camera, one lens thing. It becomes part of your muscle memory. I don't even have to look to know on the dial where it's going, because I can tell by the way it feels. It sticks a little at the A for aperture. So I know, like, it becomes part of your physical, tactile knowledge of this thing. So I could talk all day about f-stops, and that's stuff that you can learn yourself. A lot of people can teach you that. But what I hope I shared with you is the importance, and what I didn't say that's really, I utilize it, I can't really do it storm chasing, but especially in polar environments, is I find the location and I'm like, here. I like these angles, I like what's happening, I like the light, I just need something to happen. And I sit and I wait. And it's like magic. Suddenly, like, these king penguins start doing this thing, like, that looks like poetry, right in this great thing with this snow-dusted sea, and I'm like, woo! Boom. So I'm not walking around chasing. I see this happen a lot in Antarctica. I see these people just like, they feel like they got to see everything, and they got to photograph every penguin, and it's like, dude, chill. Just sit down and be still. And amazing thing happened when you sit still. Penguins come right up to me, and it's like they're posing. They're like, it's like I can't. But that being still and just observing, then you're like, oh, look at that. And you might even say you're in a spot and you're like, you think it's what you want, and you sit and you watch, and you're like, oh, look at that. Look what's going on over there. And so then you move over there and you get what you saw. So that being still is really important, and really observing. If I give you homework, it's to, even if it's raining tomorrow, just be outside for 5 minutes and don't move and watch. And, like, watch the people and listen. And it's amazing. It really is like, wow, I was missing the world. I highly recommend that as your homework. Last question? Nobody?
You still use film?
I just moved. I fled the U.S. to Ireland after a certain political situation arose, and I had to get rid of this stash of film that I was holding on to. I had hundreds of rolls of Kodak Portrait, medium format, and 35mm, and even Polaroid. I had this whole stash of Polaroid. People came from over 100 miles to buy the Polaroid. They're like, do you still have the Polaroid? I was like, no. So I still have my cameras. I kept my 4x5 and Rolleiflex, all of them. But I don't have film at the moment. The last time I picked up my Rolleiflex to make a photo with it, it felt good. But I have a Leica MP, which is digital, but it still gives me that clunk that I got with my Leica film camera, but it's digital. They've made travel hell for photographers, because especially film, because I can't check my film. It means I have to travel with it on the plane, but I can, and I don't check my cameras ever. I carry those on the plane with me. So where am I going to carry 4x5 sheets of film? It just becomes impossible. Unless I'm doing a road trip, I really don't see that I could use film the way that I used to. Yeah, sad, but the other part of that is I think digital has come of age. I mean, it's very difficult to tell the difference now between film and digital. And that's, for me, a good thing. And I don't know, how many of you, nobody wanted to know anything about a specific image here? Like, what was going on?
Just with the iceberg
Red one?
and the red background, yeah, I was kind of slightly stunned just for the colour.
Me too.
difference,
So, this was December 29th, 2017. And there was a young photographer on the ship with me from Sweden. His name is Jonathan. And we're going into the Lemaire Channel, which is famous for its light, especially right around the solstice. So December, that last week of December is perfect time to be there. And the conditions were looking really good, like not too windy or not too much ice blocking. And he came outside, and this was past 1 a.m. And he looked tired, and he was wearing a t-shirt and flip-flops. And it was freezing out, and I was like, dude, what are you doing? And he made a few pictures. This hadn't happened yet. And I was like, I could feel it. Sometimes you feel it. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. He's like, oh, I'm going to bed. I was like, are you sure? I said, are you sure? I was like, I feel something's going to happen. And he said, no. And he left. And the color just, it went from these purples to this orange to this red. And I was like, literally, I had to keep putting the camera down. Like, am I seeing this right? Like I didn't want to think that maybe my eyes were making a color that wasn't there. And I made out, because the colors kept changing. I have hours. I stayed out because I was wearing my scoop and I was dressed warm. I was out there till past 2 a.m. and photographed the whole event. And then National Geographic called me on the ship and they said, we hear you're down there. We need some nice pictures of the area. Do you have any? I was like, so I sent them just some thumbnails, and this became my very first Nat Geo cover. And when they called me and said, oh, we're giving you the cover. And I told Jonathan, you could see he was just like, you gotta be out there. And so, trust me, I have missed more photographs than I have made. We are human. But when you feel, sometimes I do it, I can feel something's happening. Like that one, oh my goodness. I was standing in the wheat. I was having like this, how many of you saw, what's his name, the Australian actor, Russell Crowe in Gladiator. And he has that scene when he's in the wheat fields. That was me. I was in the wheat fields and I was like, wow. With the storm was right over the farm. And I look at our meteorologist and I say, are we okay? Because it was coming right towards us. At about 20 miles an hour, so that's not very fast, just slowly moving. And I said, are we okay here? And he goes, yeah, it's just an LP mesocyclone. And that means low precipitation, not a lot of water, a dry, so it becomes this barber pole, very nice structure. And I was like, okay. And I was making these pictures as it came over us, and we let it come right over our head. And it was one of the only, well, I've had 2 times, that time and another where I didn't know what to do. I didn't know. It was still too much. I didn't know where to point the camera. I was like, short circuiting again. But that, you do have these moments when you feel it. So trust that feeling. I spend a lot of time working with people, learning to trust that feeling again. Because there's so much of us that have been like, oh, don't trust we've been taught to not trust our instincts, not trust that feeling. But I try and bring that back in people. I think I've kept you long enough. Don't you? No? Does anybody want me? It's almost 9. Anybody more questions? I can do this all night. I can sign books. I can.
I think signing books, if anybody's wanting to buy a book, because we've got dinner books.
Oh, what time's dinner?
9:30.
Okay, we're good. We're good. But if you have questions, you've been very quiet.
Yeah, no, I'm not firing. That was just lovely listening to you. Really fascinating. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Good. How many of you want to go to the polar regions now? Show of hands one more time. Oh, that's a good amount. Stay in touch with me because I might be able to put something together if our schedules will. We could have a Scottish expedition to. You want the Arctic or Antarctic? Arctic is much easier and cheaper to get to, but Antarctic is.
I want both.
I want both. Oh, bipolar.
And green.
But yeah, seriously, do reach out to me if you're like, I want to do it. This is what. Tell me more, and I'll tell you where I'm on ship and when I'm on ship and what the costs look like. But it's totally possible now. Thank you all.
Thank you.